Hi everyone, thank you very much for the introduction. So as mentioned today, I'm going to be talking through a number of strategies that broadcasters can use to increase their share of time in digital as viewing continues to shift to streaming. So first off, a bit of background. As we can see, viewing on linear and scheduled TV channels has declined significantly. And now much of this has been attributed to SVOD. And actually, we reached an inflection point last year in the UK where linear viewing overtook that of VOD for the first time. Now, these figures are self-reported, so one thing to bear in mind is that they might be a little bit lower than expected, but it's still a really important data point nonetheless, because it signifies that for the first time in the UK, the average consumer is viewing more content on SVOD than linear. And if we look at some of the other service types we ask about, we can see that for BVOD viewing, this has also increased, but not at the same rate as SVOD, and also not at the same rate that linear viewing has declined. At a similar level, we've got time spent viewing free online videos, such as YouTube and social media. And we're also starting to see a rise in pure play AVOD viewing, such as on platforms like Pluto TV. If we now just take a look at that online viewing component, we can see that BVOD viewing makes up about 20%, and this is a level that's remained fairly consistent over time. But as mentioned, we're starting to see a bit more competition from other free services, those AVOD services in the green at the top. For UK respondents, about 71% indicated that they'd watched a BVOD service in the past month. 82% indicated that they'd watched an SVOD service. So while these figures are quite similar, the amount of time spent viewing on BVOD is actually half that of SVOD. And there are a few reasons for this. The first being the different audience types. BVOD users tend to skew older, and older viewers spend less time watching content online in general. Another factor is that these BVOD services are often still used as catch-up. And for all of the major BVOD services in the UK, 2/3 of users indicated that they'd also watched the corresponding linear channels in the past month. So now for the rest of this presentation, we're going to focus on 5 strategies that broadcasters can A, use to increase the amount of time existing users spend watching content on the platform, and also B, to attract new users, particularly younger demographics, to the service. As we can see here, BVOD platforms are underweight when it comes to scripted content. And instead, the focus is largely on local documentary, entertainment, and reality content. Whereas for SVOD platforms, scripted hours are high, making up about 80% of the catalogues, roughly. This is also reflected in the upcoming commissions for both of these players. And if we can use also Ampere's popularity score to look at how who's driving the popularity and engagement for each of these content types. Ampere's popularity score is a proprietary metric that is essentially a measure of relative consumer search activity levels on third-party sources such as Google and Wikipedia. And if we look at the top 50 unscripted titles that were available in the UK in 2022, a third of these were available on broadcaster VOD services. A further 18 or 20% were shared between BVOD and SVOD services. But if we look at the top 50 scripted titles, just 14% were available on BVOD services. And again, about 18% that were shared between BVOD and SVOD. So this really highlights how scripted content is dominated by the major SVODs. So we can also use Ampere's popularity score to highlight some of the benefits of scripted content. As we can see here, we've got top scripted titles and unscripted titles from major broadcasters in the UK, looking at their relative popularity at release and also in the year following that. And we can see that scripted titles are able to generate a much higher initial level of engagement, which essentially means they're able to draw in a wider engaged audience. For not only this, but over time, scripted content is able to retain a higher level of engagement, which essentially means it becomes a more valuable library asset. So the first recommendation here is to increase scripted content within the catalogues. But of course, scripted content is obviously more expensive to make. So the suggestion here isn't necessarily to just pour loads more money into scripted content, as obviously that's unrealistic. So instead, it's more about balancing current content spend levels to mean a more sort of even mix between the two content types. There are also some other ways that broadcasters can increase the amount of scripted content in their slates. And one of these is co-commissioning, which is our next recommendation. So broadcaster co-commissions were actually declining, as we can see on the right-hand chart. But partly this was due to COVID, where travel restrictions made these cross-market collaborations much more challenging. But also there was a bit of a growing reluctance to partner with competitors like Netflix. However, we are seeing global content spend slowing down for all players, and this means that budgets are going to be a lot more flat, and therefore we do expect co-commissioning activity to increase. And we can actually already see a little bit of an uptick in the past few quarters. Not only do co-commissions mean that it's a lower cost for each of the commissioners involved, but it often can produce really big hits. So again, we've used Ampere's popularity score to isolate the top 50 shows by their peak popularity in 2022 in the UK. 20% of these were co-commissions. However, a lot of these single commissioner shows were made up of long-running series such as soaps or popular library assets such as The Office and Peep Show. And actually, if we narrow down to just the shows that were released post-2020, we can see that 67% of these are actually co-commissions, including popular shows like All Creatures Great and Small, Normal People, and Industry. Our third trend is non-exclusive content. So we're seeing a real shift in the industry at the moment, where players like HBO Max and Disney Plus, who have previously followed a strategy where they've kept almost all of their content in-house on an exclusive basis, are starting to assess whether that is in fact the best way to monetize content. And we can already see HBO Max essentially licensing out some of its content non-exclusively, essentially to monetize that content more effectively. And we do expect this to happen globally. And essentially what this means is that it's going to be a larger pool of high-quality studio content available to license, and broadcasters can acquire some of this to increase their depth of catalogue and the amount of scripted content available. But this particular strategy also works in the other direction. Broadcasters also typically have very high levels of exclusivity within their catalogue. So some older library assets could also be licensed out to other SVOD platforms and AVOD platforms, again, to monetize that content more effectively, generate more revenue, which can then be fed back into creating new content. We've got another example here from the US market, looking at AVOD platform Tubi, where we can see a similar thing happening. So of the content that was added to Tubi in the past 6 months, which is essentially represented by those bottom 3 segments of the Sankey chart, about a third of them were previously available on other VOD platforms, either other AVOD services or available as an SVOD exclusive. The fourth strategy is about windowing, and in particular digital-first premieres. So of the first-run series released in 2022 by major broadcasters, a very small proportion still are released as VOD premieres. And increasing this is really key in order to attract new users to the platform and also transition those linear viewers into using the platform more heavily, particularly as we are starting to see an increase in VOD users amongst those older age groups. And it will also help to pivot those BVOD platforms further away from being seen as catch-up services for those consumers. Next slide. Oh, there we go. And we can see the benefits of having weekly VOD releases, exclusive VOD releases, here illustrated by Killing Eve's popularity in the UK. Season 1 was released as a box set, with all episodes dropping at the same time. And typically when content is released like this, you see very short and sharp spikes in engagement. The subsequent seasons were released with weekly releases, and this essentially has the effect of lengthening that period of peak engagement. And this is really key to essentially keep users coming back to the platform repeatedly, which then offers more chances to engage them with other pieces of content through recommendations and the like. It's also important for any broadcaster that has a subscription tier. We're seeing users increasingly juggling a larger number of services as the market becomes more and more saturated. So having these exclusive weekly releases spread out over the course of the year can really maximize the amount of time that users either have to stay subscribed to the service or keep coming back to the free service. And this strategy is really exemplified by Disney+. For example, if you were a Marvel subscriber, a Marvel fan even, and you wanted to watch every Marvel spin-off episode as it dropped in 2022, you'd have to stay subscribed to the service for 10 months. If, by contrast, Disney+ dropped all of the seasons as a box set, like Netflix still commonly does for a lot of its content, you'd only have to stay subscribed for 5 months. The fifth and final trend is to do with social media strategy, and in particular, how that can engage younger audiences. So we collected IMDb demographic review data, which essentially allows us to see how many users from each age group are interacting with different types of content or different pieces of content. And what we can see is that Netflix originals skew significantly younger than compared to SVOD content on the whole. And while part of this is due to the types of content that Netflix creates, it often does target younger audiences. There are essentially, we can see this young youth skew across all genres of its originals, including things like crime and thriller, which does typically perform better with older audiences. So there are definitely some other factors at play, and one of those are Netflix's quite successful social media strategy when it comes to marketing its originals. And as we can see here, when it comes to consumers deciding what content to watch, the drivers do vary quite dramatically by age group. For our older consumers, the genre, actors, and characters play the most important part. But for younger consumers, while this is important, there are other reasons such as recommendations, word of mouth, and social media that are also really key. So having a social media strategy that spans Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat, which are the 3 most widely used social media platforms in the UK for users, consumers in the 18 to 24 age bracket, this can really help widen the BVOD audience and also keep these younger consumers engaged. So finally, just to summarise quickly, small scripted content can give a boost to BVOD catalogues, and this content can either be acquired or co-commissioned. Broadcasters should also consider licensing out some older library assets on a non-exclusive basis, as this will essentially help to increase revenue, but also can reach additional new audiences, particularly when it comes to AVOD and FAST. FAST as well has the benefit of being able to deliver content within a branded environment, so you don't lose brand recognition. Digital first premieres are also really key, first to attract new users to the platform, but also to transition those linear viewers. And finally, social media, when it comes to younger consumers, is a really important driver. So being able to create buzz around top shows is really important to keep these users engaged. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end. If you would like a copy of the slides, then you can use the QR code above. Otherwise, I'm also very happy to answer any questions via email. Thank you.
Actually, we do have 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
So we could probably get one question in.
Go for it.
That very slight drop-off in BVOD usage, according to what people are telling you, seem to coincide with the rise in AVOD at the same time. Is that the cause, or is that just a coincidence?
I think it very much could be related, as they do target the same audience types. Both of them tend to skew older. Obviously, it's both free content, so I don't think there's been a huge drop-off. There tends to be a little fluctuation when you look at that sort of consumer data, but yeah, they're definitely competing for the same eyeballs there.
Thank you, Lottie. Have a great day. That was very, very useful presentation.